All right. So yes, thanks again, Jane, for the intro, and thanks to you all for having me here tonight. So you're going to join me on a virtual guided walk of the Earls Sluice. But we're actually going to give apologies at the very beginning because this is not going to be London or Middlesex oriented, so we're just going to be adjacent to this evening. So we'll be following the path of one of London's so-called lost rivers, Earls Sluice. It's a modest river, quite a small one in South London. It doesn't even get on the label of the map here on the slide, but I'm sure you'll agree as we go along that it really punches above its weight and that it's a really good lost river. So along our virtual walk this evening, through the power of technology, I'll be pointing out some current and former sites and landmarks along the way. But before we travel to the source of the Earls Sluice, we'll have to begin our story with the Thames. Of course, I'm a Thames enthusiast, foreshore enthusiast. So the Thames winds its way through the heart of London. You could say it is the heart of London. But it's because of the Thames that London is where and what it is today. So here we are, transported to London before London. We're standing in Southwark, looking north across the Thames towards the Walbrook Valley, a sort of Cannon Street station. And this drawing's taken from Mola's book on archaeology found at the Bloomberg site. And it was reconstructed sort of through geoarchaeology and creating a topography of pre-Roman London here in detail. But what I wanted to point out was that the Thames used to be much wider than it is today, and the tide spread out over much wider areas. And then we get the Roman conquest of AD 43. Of course, you guys know more about this than I do probably, but that's all right. We're setting a scene. And here's Londinium in AD 250. And London was the most seaward point at which you could cross the Thames. So Roman troops could get from Kent to Essex and back and forth. And here's our little crossing here. So we're going to zoom in on Southwark. So again, like I said, I'm introducing you to South London away from London and Middlesex. So Southwark at this time, we've got a series of gravel islands with channels running between them and marshes in our hinterland. So here's our little marshy hinterland. And here's of course where we were standing just a moment ago, looking north across the Thames. But London's built up around the key crossing and it gradually spreads out from the river towards inland with key roads connecting hamlets. And they're later infilled with more and more development. I'll point out two rivers in case we're not familiar, or two roads rather. So we've got Sains Street, which is now Borough High Street, going towards Chichester, and the other one, Watling Street, which is the A2 and the Old Kent Road. But we'll fast forward, because they'll be here all day otherwise. Fast forward through London's history. And here we are in the 16th century on the lovely Agas map. And you can see the importance of the Thames and its tributaries that play in the history of London. So the Thames is a deep navigable river. It connects to the Channel and beyond that, the oceans and the rest of the world. So it's a strategic location and that's what plays a vital part in Britain's leader as a maritime nation. So we've got a long tradition of shipbuilding, maritime trade, colonialism, imperialism, all of these facilitate the movements of goods and people and money into and through the city. So that resulted in a huge rise in wealth and economic growth with a focal point on London, which we still see today. So I hope that quickly sets the scene for the importance of rivers to the development of London as a global city, and that having a direct connection with the Thames connected you to the rest of the world. So here we are, the mighty Thames, fed by its many tributaries, little streams and brooks and countless other drainage channels which aren't even mapped here. We can't see many of these so-called lost rivers today, but they do still flow beneath our feet and our homes and our streets. But they're not really lost at all. They're just hidden, out of sight. After centuries of use, they've been canalized, culverted, diverted. But if we walk along them, following their formerly visible paths, we can still see little traces on the surface that hint at the water that still rushes below. And here's our Earls Sluice. Like I said, doesn't even get named on the map, which was featured in the recent Secret Rivers exhibit at Museum of London Docklands, if anyone saw that. It's just one branch of a stream. It meets the River Peck, just here, which gives its name to a former hamlet along its banks. The Earls Sluice sort of flows north. Let's see where my mouse is, there it is. Flows north here, takes a right turn at Walworth, and meets the Thames here in Rotherhithe near Surrey Quays docks. So keep that in mind. But first, who's this Earl? So the Earls Sluice takes its name from the first Earl of Gloucester. And I know what you're thinking, wait a minute, why Gloucester? So here's Robert Fitzroy, first Earl of Gloucester, and his wife Mabel. His father was King Henry I, fourth son of William the Conqueror. You may have already spotted this because of his name Fitzroy, being son of the king. He was the eldest son, but he was illegitimate. So late in 1120, the only legitimate heir to Henry I's throne was drowned in a shipwreck crossing the channel, known as the White Ship Disaster. And shortly after, in 1121 or 1122, Robert's father makes him the Earl of Gloucester. He's the half-brother of Empress Matilda. He was her chief military supporter during the Civil War, known as the Anarchy, in which she vied with her half-brother Stephen for the throne of England. So for those familiar with their medieval history and the time of the Anarchy, he's best known for his holdings in Wales and the Southwest. But importantly for our story today, he was also the Lord of the Manor of Camberwell and Peckham, which is where our little river flows through. So Peckham was owned by the king, who gave it to his son, and the Earl later marries Mabel, who was the heiress of Camberwell, and unites the two properties, and hence our small river has such a mighty name. So we'll head to the source, here in Ruskin Park in Denmark Hill. We can see in the park a lovely ornamental pond here. It's often said this is possibly an open air remnant of our lost river, but if you look at historical maps, the pond does seem to be present through much of the area's history, but it's unlikely to be the source. It does give evidence to the amount of water in the area, however, so you can see it here. But from here, we can walk down the hill as it slopes down across the park, past the Maudsley and King's College hospitals and the station, and we're gonna go through the back streets of Camberwell. So while we're meandering along old watercourses through Camberwell, we should definitely stop and consider the old Camberwell here. There are a number of mineral wells and springs in the area until about the 1850s. And one of the village wells was reputed to have healing properties, and that's possibly where the name Camberwell comes from. And this photo is from 1892 of the old Camberwell before this feature was demolished. The feature itself is marked on OS maps as a little pump. And you can see this fella is sitting on the arm handle of the pump here, and it would have been driven by horses around in a circle. But we've got to be a little skeptical that this is the actual Camberwell, which gave the area its name. But it is a nice picture. So that was down here in Camberwell Green. But from Camberwell Green, we're going to head north along Camberwell Road, along here, past all the buses, as far as the entrance to Burgess Park, just about here. It's hard to see where our river could have gone as we stand on the busy Camberwell Road, but we can use some old maps to try to find it. So here on the 1828 Greenwood map, you can see sort of a little bizarre zigzag at the top here. The parish boundary between Camberwell and Newington. And that's where our next clue shows itself. So we're walking off the Camberwell Road to the right, one street up from Burgess Park, and here we are at Boundary Lane. So road names can be really excellent clues about what used to be there. and the Earls Sluice used to flow right through here. So it was once a river flowing through fields and marshes of South London, but this natural feature made an excellent landmark and acted as a boundary along its length for several parishes and boroughs. It was actually also the county boundary between Surrey and Kent. The historic parish boundary was once marked by other distinctive landmarks as well, including an old Camberwell mill. This one was known as Freeman's Mill, and this picturesque little building was once a very conspicuous parochial marker. And you can notice at the bottom here, in the bottom corner, next to the fellows with the jaunty hats, this could be a possible sighting of our Earls Sluice taking its little sharp turn as it turns towards the Thames. Now I said we could use old maps to try to figure out where our river would have gone, but rivers aren't explicitly marked out on all old maps. So here's our Roke map, 1746, and only field boundaries and other landmarks are sort of on here. However, there are some clues to where our Earls Sluice are going, especially here at Walworth Bridge and St. Thomas of Watering's Bridge at Old Kent Road. And also notice our Camberwell Mill here at the bottom. So up until the 18th century, when Walworth and the Old Kent Road were small villages surrounded by fields and market gardens and orchards, if you can believe that, just imagine. The river flowed up the Camberwell Road here, past our Camberwell Mill, and took its right turn under the bridges at Walworth and Old Kent Road, just where Boundary Lane is today. And so we'll go take another quick look at our 1828 map. And here's the corner of Albany Road at what is now the end of Burgess Park. So that's kind of where we're standing in our virtual walk today. And you can notice here the boundary zigzag again, following up the Camberwell Road and across Walworth Road back towards the Old Kent Road here. And if we zoom in here, we'll notice Windmill Lane, with a windmill still standing in the 1820s, just here. So again, it's our little markers showing themselves through the old maps. But we'll continue our journey following our elusive river along through here. We're at Boundary Lane, just along here. So we're heading back towards Burgess Park along one of these side streets. And now it's, of course, it's a lovely wide open space, reminiscent of the former open fields in Walworth Common that were located there in the past. Of course, it's a modern construction. But here at the entrance to Burgess Park at Camberwell Road, you can see the remnants of the Grand Surrey Canal, so another waterway that will help us with some clues. So it's, now you can see it as a sort of long, straight path running the length of the park. But it, as you can see from our old map here, it did run parallel or near enough to the Earls Sluice for our next part of our walk. So we can use it as another clue to help us keep on our search for our old river. This stretch of the canal was completed in 1810 here, and it was intended to carry on all the way from the Thames to Portsmouth, but it ran out of money here in Camberwell after only a few miles. It also has a later spur in Peckham, which is also a lovely walking route. So the canal, built in the early 1800s, would have been a bustling hub of industry, moving goods from the factories and workshops of Walworth and Camberwell and Peckham to the docks at Surrey Quays, but also moving timber from around the world, landing at the quays to the timber yards of South London. And you can see here some of the Thames sailing barges along the canal and some of the timber wharfs at Addington Square. But even though it seems like it would be a lovely blue route through South London, it was less than salubrious. A lot of people drowned in it because they would use it for swimming, including, so they had to put signs up that say danger to children. And in South London slang, it was known as the Camberwell Death Trap. And when it was drained, they found all sorts of garbage filling it, including several cracked safes, which probably were chucked in by the notorious Richardson gang. So the canal was drained and infilled in the 40s to the 70s, and was turned into that path in the center of Burgess Park. But we can still follow the path of the canal with wharf walls, past industries, including the large lime kiln at the former lime works and the bridge to nowhere in the middle of the park, and use that to help us find our Earls Sluice. So like I said, we left off here. This is, if you use the power of imagination, Burgess Park. We're walking down Albany Road here. So we'll look at our former Surrey Canal line to help us guide us on our work for, look for the Earls Sluice. So we left off Boundary Lane. We're walking down Albany Road here now. And using this map from the 1860s, notice the strange sort of wibbly wobbly boundary lines on the houses fronting Albany Road. You can see here, wibbling and wobbling. So these meandering boundary lines will really help us mark out our journey for the next leg east along the road. And you can see here how built up it is compared to our maps from not too long before this. So every inch of land is being built on, and there's absolutely no signs of any waterways anywhere. But just a few years earlier, this is the 1832 map, the Earls Sluice is still flowing freely above the ground. So pardon my terrible highlighting, but just here's one I made earlier, highlighting the route of the Earls Sluice as it flows open and free along Albany Road here, off towards the Old Kent Road, which was all green open spaces before, before the big Tesco got there. But here is the updated edition of that same map, just 8 years later in 1840. And our section of the river along the Albany Road has disappeared here. So why is that? Well, in the past, Londoners didn't think about littering in the same way as we do. And an easy way of disposing of rubbish was to dump it in a nearby river, which would wash it out to sea. And if you remember those pictures of the waste in the drained Surrey Canal, similar to that. But this dumping also applied to other waste. So I apologize for anyone eating dinner at this time, but yes, we're talking about poo. People mostly just dispose of waste in cesspits near their homes. However, in heavy rains, these would overflow and contaminate nearby water sources. And of course, at this time, in the Georgian period, there's huge growth in population. And the area is being heavily built up, as we saw in those maps before. And more people means more waste. And unfortunately, this means after years and years of this, our rivers eventually become open sewers. So we've got rapid industrialization at the time, urbanization, and it creates many poor, filthy, foul-smelling city neighborhoods. And they tend to be a focal point of disease and epidemics. This includes several outbreaks of waterborne diseases, including cholera, diphtheria, typhus. And there were 4 large outbreaks of cholera in London in the 19th century, with the first one reaching London in February 1832. Southwark, if you're not familiar, is a particularly low-lying and marshy area, and so it was particularly susceptible to waterborne epidemics. So you can see here, basically, the outline of the epidemic is Southwark and Lambeth. There was a large outbreak in 1853 and 54, which is most well known for the discoveries made by John Snow at this time, when he traced the outbreak in Soho to that water pump, which proved that the disease was spread through contaminated water. However, Snow's view was not generally accepted at that time. So the Thames and many of its urban tributaries are basically overflowing with sewage at this time. And then in 1858, a big heat wave hits London. That causes the bacteria to thrive and multiply, and the smell becomes so bad, it's known as the Big Stink or the Great Stink. Basically, it was so disgusting, it closes House of Parliament and law courts, and caused much of the population of London that could afford it to evacuate. And there's a theory at this time of the dangers of vitiated air and the spread of disease through miasmas, so poisonous vapors where suspended particles of decaying matter could spread disease. And you can see these guys here looking for this source of the smell to sort of fight cholera. But so at this time, they're sort of improving housing and sanitation and general cleanliness of overcrowded urban areas to fight off these smells. And levels of disease were seen to fall, but that's an observation that sort of lent weight to the theory. These also included attempts to sort of clean up the river. Like I said, it's open sewage, basically. This is a cartoon from Punch in the same year, 1858, which suggested that the proposals to clean up the river are basically whitewash. But this is the year that Parliament passes an enabling act to revolutionize the sewer system in London, even though it was of great expense. And this includes Basil Jutt's Great Low-Lying Sewers, which create the embankment along the Thames. And also it's resulted in the creation of mainline sewers throughout London. So here's a little sewer map of London. These sewers incorporated previously canalized waterways into the newly connected sewer systems, and that includes our Earls Sluice, which was canalized. And if you can see my pointer, this is the Walworth Road here, and that's our Earls Sluice here, one of the little sewer lines now. So by the 1830s and 40s, the Earls Sluice had been culverted over. So this is more sanitary, but it also meant that the land could be used for building houses on, which was terribly lucrative at that time. And we saw that in our maps earlier. So basically our poor Earls Sluice becomes a stinky sewer in the 19th century. But luckily for us, the Victorian engineers left us some more clues to follow on our river's journey to the Thames. So bearing in mind what we said about the prevailing thoughts of the day about stinky miasmas, through the power of Google Maps, we're going to continue our journey east down Albany Road towards the Old Kent Road, keeping Burgess Park on our right-hand side. And we're going to see 3 big clues guiding us along our hidden watery route, including these. So these are unassuming tall iron structures. They're much bigger and thicker than lampposts, and they can be seen all over London once you get your eye in. They're large and green and particularly functional, which is why they're still here today. These are stink pipes, and they jut out high above the street level and vent gases from the sewers below, high up into the air, away from our delicate noses. They can also help vent gas to prevent explosions, so that's pretty helpful as well. But because they're so functional, they're still here, and we can follow them in a straight line all along Albany Road, showing us where the Earl's main sewer is below us. This one's just past Wells Way in front of Art in the Park. And here's another one at Bagshot Street. So we'll keep an eye out for those big stink pipes on our journey to the Thames to make sure we're on the right track for our river. So we've reached the end of Albany Road, and we're about to cross over the Old Kent Road safely and meet up at the big Tesco's. So here we are at the Old Kent Road, and the Earls Sluice, if you recall, our 1746 map flows under another bridge here in the past. So the whole area was called St. Thomas Watering, as was the bridge. And it was an important spot on the medieval pilgrimage route from London to Canterbury. If you recall your Chaucer, it's also the first stop of the travelers in his Canterbury Tales, where they draw lots to decide who will tell the first tale on their journey, while their horses have a refreshing drink in Earls Sluice. This is a 1960s tile mural that can be seen on the former Peckham Civic Centre for a little while longer, further down the Old Kent Road. So that sort of shows our scene. But also at a site right near this spot stands the former pub and boxing hall, the Thomas à Becket, on the Old Kent Road. So we've just walked up here, Albany Road, and here's the Old Kent Road here. I think it's a Vietnamese restaurant now, if anyone's interested. So at this location, Sir Henry Cooper trained above the pub when it was once a famous boxing studio, as did I think Muhammad Ali when he came to London. And the pub sign at the St. Thomas of Becket is still there, even though it's a restaurant now. So it's kind of a little memory of what was once here all those years before. So if you note, we're here, just crossing the Old Kent Road, but we're gonna continue our walk down Rolls Road, sort of like this, in a big loop, towards South Bermondsey. So here's a map of 1816, before the construction of the Bricklayers Arms Railway Terminus and Goods Yard here at Old Kent Road. And if you can use the power of imagination, Old Kent Road at this time would have been all meadowland, crisscrossed with rivers and streams, including our Earls Sluice. And Rolls Road runs roughly alongside the former course of the Earls Sluice, just through the center of our map here. And the parliamentary boundary still follows the course of the sluice today. And you can see the dotted line here. And if you note the name of this little winding road next to the Rolls Road, that gives us another clue that we're on the right track, Earl Road. I think that's a Tops Tiles now. The Earls Sluice eventually joins the River Peck. So if you remember our map from the very beginning, they meet here in South Bermondsey. Anyone familiar with South Bermondsey will know it doesn't quite look like this anymore. This watercolor is based on an earlier print, and it shows the Earls Sluice as a little culverted stream, just here in the middle, running through Rotherhithe. Out of sight on the left of the picture is Greenland Dock, and to the right is Deptford's Royal Naval Dockyard. And the land in front of many of the houses would have been used for shipbuilding, repair, or breaking, and you can sort of see the little masts in the background there. And we'll continue our walk under the numerous crisscrossing railway viaducts today. So we're just, that lovely picture was just about here, and we're gonna walk through underneath all the railway arches. So we'll keep an eye out for more boundaries that are still demarcating today the ancient Earls Sluice. So for instance, in the grounds of the old St. Helena's Gardens on this map here, just in the center, it's now Eugenia Road and Concord Way. And it has a boundary dividing right down the middle of the road along the old route of the river. And if you look to your left, you'll see Southwark Estates, and to your right, Lewisham. So we'll move along to the end of the road and take a left at more railway tracks. And voila, ahoy, an actual spotting of the Earls Sluice here at Oldfield Grove, just here. The railway has created a bigger barrier than the old river. So off it goes, up and over the tracks in this little tiny pipe. So if you don't have your eye in, you'll never notice it, but it's just this little pipe going over top of the railway tracks. It's still on its way to the Thames. So we'll take a left at the next road here, and voila, another stink pipe. So we know we're on the right track. This one's here in the middle of the junction of Lower Road and Ploughs Lane and Rotherhithe. So we're definitely still following our noses here. We take another turn here at Chiltern Grove, and you can see this lovely 1940s building, the Earls Pumping Station, which is still helping to keep the sluice and the Earls main sewer flowing on its way. So here's the Earl Pumping Station here, and this is it's all being renovated as a part of the Tideway Super Sewer Project, which is modernizing that system that Basil Jett and colleagues built 150 years ago. As you can see, this part of our hidden river was still exposed 150 years ago. So we are just about here on Chiltern Street. So here it is here. Our poor Earls Sluice and Peck River was known in those days as the Black Ditch, which is not terribly pleasant. I'm glad it's covered over now, I think, but a little less than salubrious. And our pumping station is located just about here, 50 years later. So we'll hold our noses past the Black Ditch and walk along back up towards Plough Road. And if we take a cheeky left turn off of Plough's Road into this side alley, trust me, we can see 2 manhole covers. And according to Tom Bolton, who wrote London's Lost Rivers, a walker's guide, after really rainy weather, you can hear the Earls Sluice rushing through the drains that these cover. We're almost there, folks. Only a few hundred meters to go, and then we'll reach the Thames. But we won't linger on Plough's Lane for too long. As you can see from our Roke map, it was also known as Rogue's Lane here, so you don't want to stick around for too long here. But also on Roke's map, you can see our river winding its way through fields and gardens to the Thames just at the edge of our map. And it meets the Thames just where the new dock is. So Surrey Quays at this time, which is what it turns into, is barely a twinkle in the eye at 1746. It's still open fields. There's only one dock, which was expanded later and renamed the Greenland Dock, and more docks opened after. And now we've made it to Surrey Docks, and the end of our Earls Sluice journey to the Thames. Here on the Thames Path, just by the entrance to South Dock, you can see a boundary stone marking St Mary's Parish Rotherhithe on one side and St Paul's Parish Deptford on the other. And until 1899, this was also the Kent-Surrey boundary. The stone was originally on a bridge over the Earls Creek nearby, but it was relocated to its present position in 1988 when the docks were redeveloped. And our last and final clue about the whereabouts of our Earls Sluice is this charming warning sign near George's Stairs, just on the Thames Path. And when the tide is out, if you're lucky enough to go there when the tide is out, the outlet is exposed. And you might even see the Earls Sluice itself running along the foreshore if you're not very lucky. And there's been some heavy rains. So there are stairs down to the foreshore here, but please, safety first, check your tides. And if you see any water coming out of there, maybe don't go down. But I do hope you've enjoyed our virtual journey along the Earls Sluice, and that you've enjoyed what turned out to be a talk about a sewer. Thank you very much.
That's brilliant, Steph. Thank you. I am going to see if I can work out how to unmute everyone. Oh, can everyone unmute themselves? I cannot find the button to do that for you. And can we just give Steph a traditional clap? Anyone that's unmuted themselves, give Steph a little.
Well done, Steph.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steph. Now, no one has typed any questions into the box. I'd just like to say, firstly, because I'm in the house, how much I enjoyed that. I know some of those streets. I didn't know the Earls Sluice ran along them. I actually know the Earls Sluice from the beer, which has been named after it, rather than the river itself. So when times are better, hopefully we can actually ask Steph to take us on a bit of a tour. But the great thing with doing this virtually is that it would take a lot longer to walk down there, and clearly some of it is not the most charming parts of London now, even though it obviously was in the past. And I have never heard of anyone, oh, you can't see me, well, never mind. I've never heard of anyone identifying their route by "let's follow the stink pipes."
You've not done any guided walks with me before, then.
I think that's been a brilliant talk. Now I can see half of you at a time. Does anybody want to ask a question? If you want to ask a question, can you wave your hand?
Oh, I had a question.
If someone's got a question, then just go ahead and shout then, because I'm not seeing any hands waving.
No questions.
Yes, Mike, I can see you waving. Mike, you're muted. You'll have to unmute yourself. Mike, you're muted.
Yeah, okay.
Oh,
Can
there you
you
are.
hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Stephanie, on parts of the rope map, there is a little squiggly line which seems to show a stream or a river. On other parts, there isn't. I just wonder why he doesn't show it.
Well, that's what I thought too. I thought, how bizarre to show bridges with no squiggly lines underneath them. But then in other parts showing the river itself. So I don't know why that was done. Maybe he didn't quite get as far down the Walworth Road.
Roke is known to be a bit iffy in the less built up places. So I think he took slightly less care when there were fewer straight buildings to draw.
I think you're right. And also in that area, just because of setting around the Walworth area, some of the boundary lines for the fields don't quite match up either. And in fact, I think he fudged it on some of the roads down there too. So I don't think he got down there.
Vic, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just that's fascinating. Thank you very much. Those sewer lampposts are completely news to me. Are they all over London or just there?
Yeah, once you get your eye in, you'll see them absolutely everywhere.
Along the embankment? The embankment?
There's a few vents along the embankment. I think some of the lampposts are kind of redesigned to also be vents. But the green pipes, you see them all over the place. So if you have that sewer map, you can kind of walk around and find them. But you know, they're not just South London, not just North London, they're all over the place.
I've got a sewer map, but they don't go upwards.
Well, you can walk along the top of them and you'll still see them.
I'll do that.
Depending on what part of town you are in, some of the ones in Clapham are white, I think, and some of them have fancy things on top, you know, little crowns and little hats on them. So.
But in central London as well, there are some.
Yeah.
Right.
Depending what parts you're in. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Malcolm, can I ask if you have any guidance on how to spot a sewer vent pipe? Because you are the fount of all knowledge on all things industrial. Malcolm, we can, yes. Any top tips for spotting a sewer pipe?
Well, they are the rather tall pipes. They might be in North London attached to a gable end of a wall or something, well, a gable end of a terrace or something like that, rather than a freestanding. And you have one or two, or used to have two in East London, which were actually made of brick and freestanding. There's still one there near the Regent's Canal. But you know, you just got to know what's likely to be there and see it through. Go to the sewer plan, it's best, and then you'll know where to find them. But, yes.
Brilliant, thank you for that.
There is a good map someone made. I'll see if I can find it and put a link in the chat for everybody.
Peter, I can see you waving.
We have some brown ones round us with more sort of ornate bases. In Holden Road, there are one or two. So you get them in lots of places. A long time I wondered what they were for, but I now realise.
I feel that someone may have to do a consolidation of this. Pat, chip in.
Yes, in Pinner we have a more sweet name for them. We call them puff pipes.
That's just crazy.
They're generally green.
I do appreciate that in Pinner you might have a slightly more charming name than you do in Deptford or Bermondsey, where the population are fruitier and earthier. Right, I'm just looking to see if anyone else is. Jeff, I can see you waving.
The photograph that showed the last stink pipe outside the Midland Bank, the old photographs show that it had a gas lamp at the top, powered by the methane.
Oh, wow.
Really? Yeah.
Gosh, that sounds dangerous.
Why? It burnt the gas off. It's less dangerous.
How would you regulate the flow?
No, you don't. There is a small coal gas pipe going up it to run a pilot light at the top.
Fantastic.
There is still a working one in Carting Lane in West End.
Is there?
There is.
I know there are some working gas lamps, but not.
No, there is one surviving sewer gas lamp in Carting Lane, which for obvious reasons people call Farting Lane. However, there is a plaque that tells you about it. The plaque does not tell you that it's not the original because a van demolished it, so it's a reproduction, but it's still there.
Oh, that's a shame, but that's brilliant. I mean, I only found out relatively recently that we still have a number of gas lamps working, but to actually have a sewer gas lamp as well is, you've got to love London. You really have.
There are thousands of gas lamps still in London. Thousands.
1,000.
Oh, well over 1,000. All around St James's Park, St James, all around there. There are lots and lots.
I didn't know there were that many. I knew there were a number around there, around the Albany and Piccadilly. Rob, were you waving?
Yes, I was. It's just a question about the word sluice. We all know what a sluice is, but I've not really seen it referring to a river or in the name. I just wondered why it was called a sluice and not the Earls River or the Earls Creek or the Earls more common.
Yeah, I don't know either, because you get brooks as well. But there were, if you look on Old London Online, the Survey of London, it has mentions of other sluices that don't quite make it in our memory, I guess. So Southwark had loads of little drainage bits called sluices and creeks and this, that, and the other. And they're about the same size as this. This is quite small, but it just happened to be the boundary for a rich guy's land. So we remember it. But I don't know.
Okay. Yeah.
Does anyone else have any more questions?
We're all going to shoot out looking for the stink pipes now.
Yeah,
do it.
There's still an hour or so of daylight out there, so
that map's a good starting point, but it's missing some good ones. So
brilliant. Well, I think then if
an article for the next newsletter.
Well, if anyone would like to volunteer, Richard will be delighted because he is always looking for content.
Yeah.
Brilliant. I think if no one else has any more questions, sorry, I'm sort of scanning across to see if anyone is waving, and no one is waving. I think firstly, Jeff, you're waving.
Sorry, I found that photo if you want me to share it.
Please.
Yes, are you able to share?
Yeah, let me, if you allow me to, or if I'm allowed.
Yeah,
to,
it says one can share at a time. If you want to try and wrest control.
Share screen.
There. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now the gas lamps are actually halfway up it.
Oh yes. Oh
yeah.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Brilliant.
Wow.
Amazing.
It's fantastic.
Great.
That is lovely. Thank you very much. This is great, isn't it? I mean, Zoom talks and walks are not quite what we are used to. We have to bring our own beer and so on. But actually, the ability to have things like this is, I think, very good. So I would like to think that this has been a reasonable success for our second LAMAS late. Oh, Malcolm, you're waving.
Before you close, just to mention that along the Rotherhithe waterfront, there is the Duffield Sluice, which is another distributary of this system and linked to the further waterways further east. And you can see the there's a house which was over the top of the sluice, which discharged into the River Thames at low tide, and it's a brick building along the Thames side path. And these various waterways, before the days of the Metropolitan Water Board, were looked after by the local commissioners of sewers for this part of the world, and they were responsible for all these installations and putting them into sewers. The sewer means the old watercourse in the old days, but putting them under underground sewers. Once the area became built up and open sewers were no longer appropriate. And those particular stench pipes are very tall, so they must have been a particular feature of the local people, local institutions.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for that. I think everyone now can go out and identify their local puff pipes, stench pipes, stink pipes, whatever colour they are. But that's been great. I think this is our first time with our Zoom Pro account, and we seem to have got to grips with it. As some of you will know, LAMAS will be running its lectures like this for a little while. Notification will be is in the newsletter. Booking, I think, is now open via the Eventbrite site, and you'll get sent the links for the lectures. So keep an eye on all that. We're going to run the LAMAS Lates a bit more informally because we've always been a bit more informal. So keep an eye out on the email mailing list for the next one. I might do a tour of Greenwich Park, so you'll be delighted to know you won't have to flog up and down that enormous hill in Greenwich Park, and I'll hopefully take you on a walk around there. I like the idea that everyone brings their own sherry or brings their own beer and can rapidly throw some pictures and weblinks in. So thank you very much for coming, but special thanks to Stephanie for, reading your name rather than remembering who you are. Thanks very much to Steph for a great walk, and if we can say goodbye and see some of you hopefully next time. Brilliant.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Cheerio, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, they get bigger.
Cheerio, Mike.